When we look at the story of Israelites and Goliath, it was Saul who should have fought him, but he missed out on great things because of fear. Instead of conquering by faith, Saul was paralyzed by fear, and so the task fell to David instead. Like Saul, it is easy for us to give in to fear. The enemy may seem bigger and stronger than us. How can you be a David and not Saul? How can you conquer by faith? We're going to look at some simple principles of how to conquer our Goliaths by faith instead of being paralyzed by fear. First, trust God's power. When we read 1 Samuel 17:32 and 33, then David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with the Philistines." And Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistines to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he is a man of war from his youth." What does it mean to trust God's power? It means that you don't worry about your own weakness. Saul was quick to pinpoint out David's weakness, telling him that he is inexperienced, he lacks training to combat any experienced man of war like Goliath. But David doesn't let that deter him. In fact, David is the one encouraging Saul in the situation. He tells him, "Don't let anyone lose heart on account of this Philistine." When you're trusting God's power, you don't worry about your weakness. As God says in 2 Corinthians 12, verse 9, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Psalm 105, verse 5, we read, "Remember the wonders he has done, his miracles, and the judgments he pronounced." So, like David, to overcome fear, we have to remember God's faithfulness in the past. In 1 Samuel 17:34, David makes a statement of faith. He reminds Saul and himself how the Lord delivered him from the paw of a lion and a bear. He reassures Saul of what God did for him in the past and how he delivered him. Are you facing a situation bigger than you right now? Trust God's power. Don't worry about your weakness. Remember God's faithfulness in the past. That's what David did to face Goliath. Use God's weapons also. David couldn't use Saul's weapons. Instead, he chose 5 smooth stones. 2 Corinthians 10:3-4, we read, "For though we live in this world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of this world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds." What are the weapons of this world? Violence, intimidation, manipulation, deceit. As Christians, we don't use those weapons. Instead, we use God's weapons of prayer, Word of God, faith, truth, mercy, love, and compassion. It doesn't make sense to the world, but it makes sense to God, and that's all that matters. God willing, we will continue. But for today, to overcome your Goliath, remember these 3 simple principles. Don't worry about your weakness. Remember God's faithfulness in the past, and don't use the weapons of this world. Be blessed.